Just about a week or so ago, I made this satellite-based tracking missile in Besiege, and I had a lot of fun doing it. In fact, in this video, I wanted to come back and try to make 3 different missile concepts and use them to try to completely obliterate some campaign levels. And loaded into the sandbox now, the first missile that I wanted to try to make was one that just had a lot of bombs. Now this sounds pretty easy, but the problem with it is that if you put a lot of bombs next to each other, the explosion really doesn't get any bigger than just using a single bomb. In order to spread out that explosion, you also need to spread out the bombs, and that's mainly the problem I'm gonna have with this first missile. So my first idea here is one that I've tried before, and you can see I could put a few grabbers on this wheel, and I could put some bombs on the grabbers. Now the advantage of this design is that I can spin it up and throw the bombs away really far. This is a very compact way to throw some bombs around, but of course only 4 bombs really isn't gonna be that impressive. To add more bombs on, I wanted to add on some more wheels and stack them on top of each other like this. You can see now the wheels add their speeds together, and assuming the wheels don't break from the forces, this should let me throw the bombs a lot further. Now this still wasn't bad, but I was gonna need a lot more bombs if I wanted this to be effective at all. So to improve the density of the bombs, I tried adding 8 onto a single wheel, but the diagonal ones have nowhere to attach to, and they ended up just falling down. So next, I tried raising it up a little bit, and this did seem to work, but the problem arises when I try to add on even more wheels. The added wheels end up spinning the bombs right into each other, and this means I don't really have a great way to throw them. Sometimes I'll get lucky and I'm able to throw them before they hit into each other, but this still really wasn't great, and instead of using this wheel, I wanted to try a slightly different design. Now here you can see what I'm doing is adding on a steering hinge, and I turned up its speed to 20 times. This makes it pretty fast, and next, I wanted to try to build a large ring of ballasts around this and put some bombs on that. Now while I was building this, intersecting all these steering hinges into each other makes them shoot out in a straight line, which I thought might be interesting for a future video, but you can see I deleted off all those intersections and I started to brace the ballasts to the steering hinge. I was hoping this was gonna hold together, but unfortunately it only held the 4 ballasts I had braced to. Now another issue I had noticed is that this was swinging back and forth a lot here, and the bending was kinda bad. Now I tried bracing everything together and I was hoping it was gonna work out, but there's just a lot of inertia here and it's a bit too much for the design to take. As long as I get it up to speed though, it does seem to mostly hold itself together, so I was hoping with a few more braces, this would end up being a bit more rigid. Now unfortunately though, while it was more rigid, it was also pushing one of the ballasts out just a little bit, and you'll notice it's very off-centered. Now last thing I was hoping for is that if I added on a lot of ballast, I could throw off the bombs before there was any big problems, and you can see me doing that here. Now giving it a test at first, it didn't really work great, but fortunately it sometimes did manage to work, and you can see I got this extremely nice ring of bombs. This was extremely satisfying, and as long as I could get this to work most of the time, I was pretty happy with it. The problem is though, if I want more bombs that don't go on that same radius, I'm gonna need to add on another one of those steering hinges, and that's where problems started to arise. Once I got this braced up, the amount of force on it was just way too much, and it would immediately break almost every time. With more than 2 layers, this just completely wasn't working anymore, and I was gonna need something that was a lot stronger. Now I thought that maybe the original problem was just the steering hinges, and to fix that, you can see I added on a wheel, and I'm bracing up all these bombs to that wheel. The problem with this though is that if I add a single wheel back in, you'll notice I only retain half of the bombs once again. Now I also suspected that braces were a big part of my problems, so I tried to use ropes and winches here, but this was a horrible idea, so I had to use the braces anyway. This was still a little bouncy, and you'll notice when I try to accelerate it, all the bombs don't accelerate at the same time. So seeing this, I kinda just had to accept that massive rings of bombs were going to be very unstable, and I decided to go back to what I had before, but I did want to change up a few things. Now first, you can see I'm pushing in the grabbers as far into the wheel as possible, and this makes the bombs even denser. Now next, you can see I'm copying up this wheel, and I'm setting it to 0 times speed. This isn't unique from before, but one thing I noticed is that I'm able to drag around this wheel even though it's set to 0 times speed. This play, I was thinking, was probably causing some of my problems, so I deleted it off, and you can see I replaced it with a ballast. Now trying this out, it's a lot more rigid, although I noticed I was still able to pretty easily rip it off. So I replaced some of those ballasts with rotating joints, and once I did this, they are way stronger. Now they still would rip off from time to time, but it took a lot more force, and trying out the safe bomb design, it was a lot cleaner than the previous one. So to fit on even more bombs, I rotated back the first set of bombs and rotated on 2 more sets. This was looking pretty good, although it was still a little bit weak and the ballasts were getting ripped off. And so to deal with that, you can see I deleted off these ballasts and I'm replacing them with hinges since they grab onto whatever they're attached to way stronger. This was already looking way better, and spinning this up here, I was easily able to get off multiple sets of bombs. Now the other thing I really like about this is that my bombs aren't really far away from my axis of rotation, which is gonna make fitting them in a missile way easier. Now I was even able to double the speed on this, and they still seem to be holding together really well. So with this, I wanted to add on another wheel here and add on more speed to get another ring of bombs. What I had noticed though is that these bombs didn't really seem to go any further. Looking at it in slow-mo, you could also see that that wheel doesn't really seem to be adding much speed, and trying to double it here did add a little bit, but it's definitely not going twice as fast as the bottom wheel. Now, in order for this to work, I was gonna need to create nice rings of bombs that went consistent distances, so I really didn't like how inconsistent it was. So eventually, I realized that the easiest thing to do was, instead of stacking all of these pieces on top of each other, I could just have separate little units that created each of these rings, and you can see this is working a lot better. Now, I even got 6 of these stacked up here, and you can see I get this nice cone that falls straight to the ground and creates a huge grid of bombs. Those outer rings were looking pretty thin though, so to fix that, I added on 3 more sets of bombs and rotated them just a little bit. This seemed to help out a lot, and now I had some pretty good coverage. At lower altitudes, the bombs pretty much coat the ground, and with this, now I just needed to get this in the air. Bombs are not light, so this wasn't exactly an obvious task, but the first thing I was thinking was to try to use some steam cannons. Now, once I got all these on here, they did seem to be producing some thrust, and once they were braced a little bit better, I tried dropping it, but these were no match for the massive weight of this missile. So next, I thought maybe I could use a hot air balloon block, but this would pop immediately from the stress it was under. So seeing that, I knew I was gonna need a lot of separate engines, and I thought about using this flying block. Now, I could fit a lot of these inside of the missile, and you can see me shrinking this down now and setting it to 100 times strength. Now, testing this out here, it was a little bit backwards at first, but fixing it now, I was able to slightly hold up the missile, and just copying more of these flying blocks on here, I was hoping I was going to be able to get it in the air. Trying this out, it did seem to work, and except for that bottom piece, the whole missile went into the air. So this was almost done, and the last thing I wanted to do here was to try to add on a nose cone and also worry about steering. Now, once I got the nose made, you can see I also painted it up here, and this at least looked pretty good. Next though, to get this to steer, I was gonna need to add on some more cannons, and the plan was that pressing any of the directional keys should turn on different cannons and steer me around. This was working, although it was pretty slow. I really like the look of the cannons though, but to help them out, I wanted to add on some fans to the top of the missile here, and you can see I'm able to steer around way faster now. And this missile works great. I'm able to easily spread these bombs around, but it does have one huge issue. Anything with the slightest amount of protection will end up getting shielded from it, and therefore take no damage. Now, that's why next, I wanted to try to make some sort of armor-piercing missile, and this was going to be extremely difficult. Now, you can see that the first thing I'm doing here is building up a massive wall, and I'm using it to protect this little windmill. Now, I threw out a bomb here, and you can see if I try to throw this bomb into the wall, the windmill ends up being protected. Now, if I threw it a little harder, it does blow up the windmill, so I decided to make the wall 4 times thicker, and now you can see I am not going to be getting a bomb through this. Now, I moved the bomb back a little bit, and you can see I also have a ballast in front of the bomb. Now, you can see this wasn't even close to going through it, but if I lower the mass of the ballast, you can see it goes a lot faster, and I thought I actually went through it. Now, upon closer inspection, it seems like I just barely whiffed it instead, so I lowered it down a little bit more, and you can see I did actually start to go into the wall. Lowering the mass even more, you can see I make a lot of progress through it before I get ejected out. My plan then is pretty much just to try to blast my way through the wall before the collision kicks me out. Now, I was gonna need a little bit more power for this, so I added 3 more bombs in, and trying this out, I very easily managed to go through the wall. In fact, if you look here, I went through the windmill as well, and that's where I realized there's a big problem with this plan. Now, sure, I'm missing a collision check when I'm in the wall, but I'm also missing it when I'm in the windmill. So I tried adding on a spike in front of the ballast, but this slowed it down a ton since it weighs way more now, and it's nowhere near getting through. So clearly, I was gonna need some way to decelerate myself once I got to the other side of the wall, and to do that, I was thinking of using a flying block. Now, with this on the front of the ballast here, I was hoping to push myself back, but unfortunately, the explosion seemed to just knock it off. It did seem to have super good power though, and that's when I realized that maybe I could just get away with using 2 flying blocks to accelerate and decelerate me. So I gave this a shot here, and you can see me able to throw myself through the wall, but I end up going so fast now that I can't even really decelerate. So I tried this again with a bit slower speed, but now wasn't even able to get through the wall, and I tried a few other things with bombs on grabbers, but this didn't really seem to make any progress at all. Now, I also thought about maybe just using crossbow bolts here, but while these will go through, they don't end up destroying structures, which isn't really going to be that helpful. And next, while cannonballs will destroy structures, they don't go through ballast at any speed, it would seem, so this really wasn't gonna work either. That, though, is when I saw the rocket and realized this was exactly what I was looking for. I set it to have a ridiculously high thrust and a ridiculously small flight duration, and you can see here, I'm able to accelerate myself and explode at a set distance. This was perfect, and with a longer flight duration here, you can see I was able to get most of the way through the ballast before I got stuck. So I tried upping the speed a bit more, and this did seem to help, and just making it go even faster finally let me go through the ballasts. I did find it was a little inconsistent though, so to make it hit more often, I just wanted to add more rockets on and see what this would do. Now, probably to no one's surprise, this was even more effective, and I was able to consistently destroy that windmill. And now with the payload designed, I still needed a missile to carry it, and I did have some requirements I wanted to put on it. Now, I wanted to use this specific thrust method just because I thought it looked cool, but the main thing I needed from this missile was it to be super maneuverable. And you can see these little fins I added in place to steer me around. But I noticed it took a long time to move around where it needed to, and I wanted something a lot faster than that. I decided though I wanted to add on the rockets before I started tuning anything, so you can see on top of the missile I added on a lot of grabbers and I added on these rockets. Now eventually I decided just to go with 2 rows of rockets here to keep things a little more simple, and they did still seem to work. So after that I added on a few more rockets, but now this thing was super front heavy. It was almost impossible to get this thing to pull up, and it frequently would just run right into the ground. Now, somewhat randomly, I decided now is a good time to add on some distance sensors, and these automatically trigger the rockets once they see something in front of it. This was just a nice quality of life thing, but I still was gonna need a way to figure out how to move this around. So first, I thought about adding on a moving propeller on the bottom, and you can see that working here. Now, I really liked the way it looked, and it was performing a little better, but it really wasn't good enough, and it still would just run into the ground. So eventually, I just added on some fans here, and with these, I was able to very easily pull myself around. This was working pretty much exactly as I wanted it to, and you can see I was even able to guide myself over to this wall. So with the mechanism working great, the next thing I did here was created a shell around the entire thing, and once I had that body made, I also had to make the nose. This was a little harder than the last one, because I had to leave gaps for the distance sensors to see the ground in front of them, but you see pretty quickly here, I was able to polish this up, and it was working reasonably well. It was a little fat though, so I just shrank it down a little bit, and with this, it was pretty much exactly what I wanted. And while these last two missiles had pretty complex payloads, this next one is incredibly simple. All I wanted on it was a grabber and a single bomb. That's because this is gonna be my hypersonic missile, and it needs to be able to go 1,700 meters per second without breaking. Now, building this here, you can see I added on some fins, and I added on a fan to power the whole thing. This wasn't bad, but to get a lot more thrust, I cranked up the speed of that fan a lot more. Now, I was pretty easily able to get around 1,000 meters per second, but the problem was that these fan blades would rip off almost immediately as soon as I started to turn to the side, and that was not gonna work well. So I deleted those off, and I was hoping that propeller blades might fare a little bit better. So with those in place, I also added on a powered hinge here, and you can see that I put a propeller blade on that. This is gonna be to guide myself left and right, and trying this out, it kind of was working, but it seemed like the blades on the bottom were doing a little too good of a job at keeping me of going straight. So I deleted off those blades, and you could see here, I actually do have a reasonable amount of control. It was still lacking a lot though, and especially at lower speeds, the whole thing seemed to fall apart often. Now, to also be able to turn left and right, I added on another set of these servos, and you can see I added on some blades on all of those. This was sort of working, but it was very unstable for some reason, and if I tried to turn too much, the blades would get ripped off immediately. So next, I thought about shrinking them down, and I thought that might help out a little bit, and it did seem to make some difference, but it still was very unstable, and it was very difficult to turn. The acceleration of this design, though, was amazing, and I really wanted to try to get something to work. Now next, I thought maybe more fans would be my solution. You can see as I spin them up, I start to rotate a bit, but the problem was that I have too much weight at the front, and it was a little difficult to spin me around. Pulling it in helped out a lot, but the turning radius still wasn't great, and this really wasn't going to be very maneuverable at speed. So finally here, I decided to add on a wheel, and once I got that shrunk down, I also added on a brace. Now, braces have very high resistance to rotation, and you can see as I spin this back and forth, it spins the entire missile. Now, this is also very unbalanced at the moment, so once I copy this over to the bottom, you can see I'm able to whip this around once I get up to 300 meters per second, and I'm able to start going in the other direction. That's not bad at all, and to do a full test here, I added on 2 more controls. Now, these all, of course, let me pitch up and down and left and right, and I decided to change up the fan here and move the missile back forward. Now, this lets me get up to extremely high speeds, and you can see once I get up to even about 1,100 meters per second, I could whip this around just as well as I could do before. So seeing all that, I decided to add on a body here and also the nose. Now, with all that made, you can also see I put on some fins, and I'm still able to whip around here and pretty much go anywhere that I want. There's a little bit of shaking in the missile at the moment, and that's mainly because I've had my game open a little bit too long, but this thing is fast. In fact, I could replay that here at 100% speed, and you can see just how fast it is. And finally now, with all these missiles built, I wanted to try to give them a test on some real campaign levels. Now, I am very outside of the build box for level 1 here, but fortunately we could ignore that, and you can see me trying out the big missile. It did occur to me though, if I delete off the big rocket and the armor-piercing one, I actually am able to fit the little missile in the box here, and you can see me able to go up in the air, whip around, and run right into that house. That felt pretty solid, and the next level I picked was one that had a lot going on. This makes the big rocket have a little bit more of a challenge, but you can still see here, it really wasn't, and I still was able to just completely destroy everything on the map. And of course, the little missile once again could go up in the air, and I wanted to try to target one of the flying ships. These ships have the ability to try to track and shoot you, but that really wasn't a big problem when you're going about 100 times faster than they could even see. And with that, I tried to pick a level here that actually let my armor-piercing rocket do something. Now, we got this big wall, and you can see me running towards it here. I'm pretty easily able to punch a hole right through it. Now, slowing that down here, it really seems to work a bit too well, and I'm able to just completely destroy it. In fact, some of those rockets seem to go a little bit too far and blast way past the wall. In general, this missile I found is pretty good for destroying foundations of structures, because it just just completely removes all the material from the bottom. The big missile is also pretty good at doing that too, albeit in a slightly different way, and this feels a little overpowered. But guys, if you have any other suggestions for future videos, make sure to leave them down below. And of course, make sure to subscribe if you like the video. Make sure to like the video if you like the builds. And otherwise, till next time.